Buzz Aldrin, Neil Armstrong, John Glenn. These are all very famous astronauts, but they're all male. What about any female astronauts? How many can you name? Female astronauts tend not to be as famous, but it is necessary to discuss them because their part of history is just as important. When I was younger, I desperately wanted to be an astronaut, so I did a ton of research on all of the famous astronauts, and it bothered me why most of the famous astronauts were men. I will now discuss the history of women in space, from the space race to the 1980s and the space shuttles, to more recently with the International Space Station. The history of women in space started about the same time as the men did, with the space race. Some women who were very important for and trailblazers were the Mercury 13 and Valentina Tereshkova. Valentina Tereshkova was the very first woman in space from the Soviet Union. She went up in June 16, 1963. She spent 70.8 hours in space and orbited the Earth 48 times. According to Anne Marsden, in her article Women in Space for Science and Its Times in 2001, when the Russian government sent Valentina Tereshkova into space in 1963 aboard the Vostok 6, the final barriers to women in aerospace area were eradicated. Other groups included the Mercury 13. These women right here. They were the very first women to be American women to be looked at for space travel. The Mercury program was NASA's very first program, which was aimed at putting men in space. According to the article, A Forgotten Moment in Physiology, by Kathy Ryan and her colleagues for the American Physiological Society in 2009, Dr. Lovelace, the head of the Women in Space program, thought that women would be better fit for going into space because, according to the research, women were lighter, used less oxygen, food, had less heart attacks in general, and were more able to handle the radiation of space, pain, temperature fluctuations, and loneliness. The research they did on these women also reflected that. As Cobb, the very first of the Mercury 13, her isolation test lasted 3 hours longer than anyone else's, including the men's. And they put all the women through all the same tests as they did with the men who went up into space during the Mercury program. However, none of the Mercury 13 women ever made it into space because representatives from NASA, including 2 astronauts, told Congress that women were not ready to be in space. Because of this statement, it was another 20 years before women ever saw space. In June 1983, almost 20 years to the day after Valentina Tereshkova's flight, the very first American woman, Sally Ride, an astrophysicist, made it into space. According to Elizabeth Schaefer's article, Sally Christian Ride, for Science and Its Times in 2001, Ride's mission represented NASA's commitment for all individuals to have access to space exploration, as well as reinvigorated the public enthusiasm for the space program. However, there were still a lot of ignorance about women's in the space program, because when Sally Ride was heading off into space, according to the article Breaking the Glass Orbit for New Scientist in 2019 by Abigail Beale, when Ride was going up on her trip, she was offered 100 tampons and a bag of makeup. Another very famous, important woman for the women in space was Colonel Collins. She was the first pilot to command the space shuttle in 1995. She later also became the first commander of the space shuttle. The Mercury 13 women were invited to the launch of Colonel Collins. And on this launch day, Hart, one of the Mercury 13 women, said, "It's not true that we've come a long way. We've been here all along. It's NASA that's come a long way." Currently, Collins is the only female commander of the space shuttle, but she is not the only pilot. Other firsts for women in space were Kathy Sullivan, the first female to perform a spacewalk, and Dr. Mae Jemison, the first African American woman in space. We have made big strides since the very beginnings of space travel for women, and the future looks a lot brighter. Currently, there has been 58 women in space since Valentina Tereshkova took her first flight, and the number is still growing. The chart over there shows the number of women graduating from the NASA's space astronaut class, and this is the number of women who have made it into flight by country. There also have been a few hiccups and barriers within the field for women. First of all, the first all-female spacewalk was canceled recently because they only had one medium-sized spacesuit that was available, and the other woman only had access to a large, but she needed a medium. NASA has also stopped repairing the small spacesuits, which can hurt women's abilities to maneuver in space if they require a small spacesuit. One astronaut, Katherine Coleman, who is the smallest astronaut to ever qualify for a spacewalk, had to reteach herself how to wear a bigger size spacesuit. And she compares this to, according to the article Birth in Glass Orbit for New Scientist in 2019 by Abigail Beale, she compares this to swimming underwater while also attached to an inflatable ball that every time you try and swim down, it pulls you back up again and turns you around. While we have made a lot of strides in teaching and getting women into space, we definitely have a lot of problems and hurdles that we have to get over. But it is a lot different from the times of the Mercury 13 and Valentina Tereshkova. Cobb, Jemison, Collins, Wright. Hopefully these names will someday be as famous as the men